This is Eze Jackson with the Real News Network. I'm sitting on a school bus right now headed from Baltimore to Annapolis, where activists are going to support a bill, House Bill 1390, that will make it where nonviolent offenders who could not afford to make bail will not have to be held in jail.
So HB 1390, what it does, there's two things primarily. The first thing is that it requires court commissioners, when dispensing bail pretrial, to exhaust non-financial conditions for release before they even consider cash bail. This is for any offense. So for instance, let's say you and I get into a fight, we get charged with second-degree assault. This law would say that the court commissioner should consider something like community mediation. So a condition for our release needs to be you go to community mediation as opposed to paying some kind of cash bail. That's the last consideration. Second thing it does is that it institutes a risk assessment tool that requires public participation in the development of it. And what a risk assessment tool essentially does is it would be the entity that would make the determination about whether a person gets released on recognizance, whether or not there are conditions for their release. You know, it suggests to the court commissioners and to the judge what those conditions should be. And so we really advocate for a community-based kind of risk assessment tool that would be bolstered by the bill that we're pushing forward. So that's what the bill does that we're here for today.
And what are some of the biggest challenges right now that you face in getting this bill passed?
Well, unfortunately, the bail bonds industry has really good relationships with some of the black legislators. So there's a very targeted effort by the bail bonds industry, especially since we know this is an issue that disproportionately affects black people. They're using black legislators really to provide advocacy for their own bill. That's essentially a smokescreen that wouldn't actually address the bail bonds problem, though the bail bonds industry's problem, but it would actually help the bail bonds industry, the bill that they're putting forward. And so that's been, one of the biggest challenges.
Someone once said that politics is war by other means, and I think we're really having a political battle with the bail bonds industry and the way they're trying to reframe the issue. So as opposed to being against reform, they've actually sponsored their own bill, which looks like reform on the surface, but in reality it's a step backwards. We actually have a rule here in Maryland that was just codified last month in the appeals court that says that judges have to look at non-financial conditions for release, which is things like, we can let you out of jail if you go to drug treatment, we can let you out of jail if you go to community mediation. So all of these can be seen as alternatives to cash bail. And so the bail bonds industry sponsored a bill which said, it basically said that if you're poor, they used the word indigent, we can figure out ways for you to be able to pay cash bail. We basically leave the cash bail system in place and figure out some mechanisms where folks who are very poor can maybe be able to deal with it a little bit better. And so that leaves the entire system in place. That leaves the profits made by bail bondsmen, which are extracted largely from the poor black community. All of that is in place, so it does everything that the lobbyists want. And so they have lined up a lot of high-powered lobbyists to push this bill, which looks like bail reform. If you're a lawmaker who's swamped and has hundreds of bills on your plate, you want to pass bail reform, you pick up the bill that's in front of your face, not knowing it's actually written by the bail bonds industry. So they've actually created an interesting tactic of, instead of being against bail reform, they're sponsoring their own version of quote-unquote bail reform, which actually is a step backwards. So we're dealing with the bail bonds industry's clout and also the confusion produced by a bill called bail reform, which is actually a step backwards and actually assures and solidifies the bail bond industry rather than regulating it and addressing its social problems.
It's an economic issue for bail bondsmen, so they would say it's a public safety issue. If somebody haven't even been found guilty of a crime, why even hold them there, period? Now you may want to classify certain crimes, such as murders and rapes like that, but you got people that's sitting in jail for petty crimes, like maybe just burglaries, or maybe even assaults where they may have had a beef with someone. Why hold those people in prison? Because that's what they are, in prison, until they can go to court, either get found not guilty or be convicted. So why hold them in prison all that time? It doesn't make some sense. Bail bondsmen, they want to continue to making money as they have been making. And at one time right here in Baltimore City, you could get out on bail and, you could go to court and that would be it. Right now, that's not it. Bail bondsman system run right now where they can put your whole house in jeopardy. So you can go to court, get found not guilty, and you still got to pay the bail bondsman.
Right now, there's a lot of pushback, of course, naturally from the bail bonds industry, and their narrative is that this is a public safety issue. What would you say to that?
I think that the simple fact that you have more bail bonds places and health food stores in these communities shows that they're making money off the backs of poor people in the bail bonds industries. Not saying that they don't have a particular use, but I think the heavy influx of people that are engaging in this infrastructure of bail bonds, they don't want to see it go away because it's a lucrative industry.
One of the challenges I'm hearing is that there are a lot of elected officials who are in the pockets of bail bonds industry. What do you think would be a good way of combating that challenge?
Well, I think largely you have to get the money out of politics, and somebody's large dollar shouldn't combat somebody who isn't able to produce, again, this bail, not being able to go home to their families, especially when it's crimes that they didn't even commit. I think about even Khalif Browder, which is the huge case, that everybody talked about across the country, that, he was somebody who couldn't produce bail off of the same system, and he ended up suffering in public view. But what about all the other people who are suffering right now under this and have suffered? Yeah.
So you bring up a good point, because the way the current structure is, it can lead to a lot of devastating things. You bring up Khalif Browder, who eventually ended up committing suicide after getting out of jail. What kind of things can we do to get it out there to the public, to let them know how important, really how crucial this is?
I think number one, somebody such as myself, I grew up in zip code 21229. I always constantly reiterate that me being able to make it out, so-called, going to college and things like that, knowing that it's a whole swath of people, young men like myself, who weren't able to, partly because of institutions like this bail bonds and cash bail. Just knowing that that's a part of that, and that there is another Khalif Browder happening every hour, and that those are not widely publicized, and to help distinguish that system, we need to have House Bill 1390 passed just so we can get started. This is just like pushing the ball down the hill. This isn't even eradicating the whole issue. So I think that's important, because these right now, somebody's getting locked up and will be getting a cash bail and not being able to pay for it, and probably is going to go through all the same mental trauma that Brother Browder went through.
Having people sitting in jail without inadequate assessment, because we all can be honest. We have some folks that it's not in the best interest of public safety for them to be out in the streets. But I think there's to be a more efficient and effective tool to make that type of decision. Not saying this kid got caught with a dime bag, or this kid got caught with a couple of rocks. We need to take him out of here because he's a public. To me, he's not a public safety concern. Yes, he was doing some things that we may not have wanted him to do as a society, as the public, but I don't see him as a risk. So why should we have him sitting in jail, possibly lose his job because he's selling drugs? Doesn't mean he doesn't have a job to help support himself, or for him to be traumatized, for his life to be impacted in some shape, form, or fashion, just because we're saying he's a risk without really knowing or assessing how much of a risk is he. So I also don't think that's a good use of taxpayers' dollars, just having someone just sit in jail.
Advocates of House Bill 1390 say that there's a serious concern that many elected officials are in the pockets of the bail bonds industry, and that the bail bonds industry may have a very heavy influence on the outcome of this bill. We'll continue to follow this story. You can stay updated with us at therealnews.com.